Hello, my name's Andy. I'm a ginger pond keeper. Welcome to episode 100. And in this episode, I'm in a freezing cold pond for content or to clean my pond. You can decide. Right, so in a move only slightly less surprising than Shed 7 being back in the charts, I've made another video. Now, I realise I haven't made a video for quite a while, but I thought I better had. I'd like to thank all the lovely people who have actually subscribed to my channel in the meantime that I haven't been making videos. But there's good reasons that I won't really bore you with now. Anyway, what's this video all about? So it's all about some sort of midwinter jobs that I very often do. The first is I've taken the leaf netting off the top of the pond because all the leaves have fallen, so now it's time to cut the marginal plants back. Now, I started doing this I think about 3 years ago. I've always trimmed the irises back, but the kind of more sort of grassy plants, I'm sorry, I don't know the proper names, I've not really cut back that much. I'll give them a little bit of a trim. But yeah, over the last 2 or 3 years, I started cutting back all of the plants down to water level. And I've just found the next year they've grown really well and they've been a lot tidier. And also cutting them back allows me to clean up around the baskets more easily as well. So it's a good kind of little hygiene system for your plants. I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but it's certainly something I do and it does kind of work, and I certainly don't have any problems. Now, it takes ages. I've obviously sped up a lot of this because I'm not that fast. It took me about 2 hours to cut all these plants back. I also clean away some of the plants on that little walled area to the right as well. It does take a long time. Now, my marginal plants in general are a little tricky in that, as you've probably guessed, I don't really know what I'm doing. And I've not really done any sort of thinning out of any of the plants, which has caused a couple of problems. So the first problem is the irises. Basically, they've overgrown their pots. And as a side effect of that, all of the plants that are in each plot have become a lot more kind of fragile, which is a little bit of a problem. So if they're completely fragile and they're basically falling over, then I've kind of removed them. But in general, I just kind of leave them and let nature take its course because I don't really know what to do. So, you know, you could reasonably say, why don't you Google it, Andy? And you would be right. It was probably a good thing to do, but I haven't done a lot of that. So I've taken a couple out, and I take quite a few more out this year. And I'll see how they grow next year, but they are becoming quite fragile, especially on the right side, which is the near side that you can see now. Now, the other problem, which you might be able to see just when I go back over there, just to the left of where I'm cutting the plants back now, is because those plants have become quite overgrown and overfilling their baskets, the mass of roots is getting quite large as well, and having quite a strange effect in that it's pushing what little earth I put in the baskets up and out of the baskets because there's so much such a large mass of roots in each basket, which, I mean, I don't know whether to worry about or not, to be honest. I don't think it's really a problem. It looks slightly unsightly, but then it looks slightly more natural, and it doesn't really affect the amount of earth matter that's in the pond. It's in the pond anyway. I mean, technically there's less earth matter. The water level is down a couple of inches at the moment, not significantly, just a little bit. But yeah, so I basically cut all the plants down to the water level as it is now, which means they'll be at or slightly under when I fill the pond back up. So I'm just clearing up all the kind of loose sort of weeds from that back area. I am thinking of planting something in there come spring. I haven't really decided what. The plants that are in there that you can see that are hanging over the pond, that main plant there is doing really well. It's utterly indestructible, I think, but it does really well, and it provides some nice cover over the pond. So yeah, this is me just finishing off the irises, and as I say, this is really sped up. I can't remember exactly how sped up it is. I think it's something like 30 times. Now, one of the side effects of cutting all the marginal plants back is it does reduce the protection that I have around the pond to stop herons getting in. So I have that heron fence that you can see, and I have the marginal plants, and together they make quite a good barrier, and no herons have been able to get to my fish. I've got a long video about why I've done it like this, which I'll link. Now there is a way herons could get in even with all the plants there, but so far they haven't problem solved it. Now the big problem is they can stand on those posts or the gate, and without the plants there they can hop down onto the marginal shelf. So what I'm doing here is linking up some fishing line across the posts to make it harder or next to impossible for herons to get down onto the marginal shelf if they're stuck on the post. And I think it works reasonably well. I think maybe I could add a bit more. As you can see here, I think this side, which is the left side when you're looking from the front, could probably do with maybe some more, because I think there's a few too many gaps. So I might get to work and do that. And then on the right side, I think it's kind of okay. But I haven't gone all the way across the pond. I've only really tried to cover the area that the marginal shelf is positioned underneath. I think once the plants grow back and reach that kind of level, then I'll cut it all back. But it was the only idea I really thought of having to try and do this, and it's always a time of year that I feel a little nervous about, really, because it's such a risk. Now, as you can see there, I've covered the shed with some fake vines, just because there was a window there before, which I didn't really like the look of, because I'd put some black sheeting behind the OSB that I'd lined all the walls with inside the shed. It always looked quite ugly and I didn't like it. So I've covered it with some vines, and it just looks a bit nicer. I mean, they're obviously fake, but I think it looks nicer than that window. And obviously I don't use the window. I've got a light in the shed, so it's all good. Right, so now I'm on to the second stage, and this may look a bit strange to you, because I've got a pond vac to clean up the pond, but I'm in the pond to clean up the pond. Basically, for a number of reasons, especially when all the plants are growing strongly in the marginal shelf, it's really hard to get into certain parts of the pond and do some really good vacuuming and get everything, especially where the pipework is from the pump that goes round the curve of that left side, and then to about where the last post is before the shed, and then behind the baskets that I've got on the bottom of the pond for the lilies, especially that point. And it's really hard to get a really good clean in there from just standing by the side of the pond. So I decided I might as well just get in. It's a little bit cold. It's not terribly cold. And it just enables me to have a really close look. I do have to have my hand up to my face, which looks strange, but what I'm doing is cutting the glare out, really, so I can have a good look. And here I'm just clearing up in amongst the baskets any kind of dead plant matter and leaves and stuff like that. And again, this took me, I haven't sped this up. I've edited this quite a lot. This took me a good hour to do, really. I spent an hour doing this because I thought, I'm in the pond, I might as well make the most of it. And then the second job I did was to use, I think it's called a sludge net, although I haven't really got any sludge in the pond. But I used a net to pick some of the bits that the pond vac wouldn't pick up, which is mainly stones and seeds that are falling in from the tree and the plants, and just some sort of heavier stuff and some kind of larger clumps of algae and things like that. So yeah, it was just to get anything that the pond vac missed. Now, I did do a video ages ago where I put a GoPro on one of the hoses to my pond vac, just to film how good or not the pond vac was in picking up detritus. And it's not as good as you think it is, even though you might have lots of waste come pumping out of your pond. I don't think it even picks up half of what it kind of disturbs or moves over, especially if you don't keep really, really still, or sorry, you don't move really, really slowly. But you know, I think every now and again getting in the pond isn't a bad idea to have a good clean, and I think this is quite a good time of year really to do it. Now, as you might see on the right side of the pond, aside from my son wandering around being quite bored helping me do this, there's lots of pebbles, and over time they've been sort of kicked into the pond and knocked into the pond, and there was probably about 50 all over the pond floor really, and they don't do any harm, but I don't really want them there. And the next job is to clean the pump. So I'm a pump fed system. I've got a very plant matter heavy pond, so I have to clean the pump quite a lot, I've found, more so than my old pump. I had an old kind of can't think of the word, but not a well-known brand of pump that wasn't Veriflow. It was about 13,000 litres an hour, and although I haven't got this pump running much faster, it just seems to get blocked a lot more than my old pump did. And I don't know if that's because there's bigger gaps in the cage that surrounds it, and then it gets into where the impeller is and stuff. So I do have to get in and clean this pump more often than I did with my old one. But I just had a look and there wasn't a lot. I do have a kind of poke around. It is turned off, obviously, and clear out any lumps. But it's something I need to keep an eye on, because I've noticed a few times that it will seem to work fine and not be blocked and not be blocked, and then suddenly be almost completely blocked. It's quite strange. But yeah, I just need to keep an eye on it and hop in the pond and give it a quick clean. It's not really a particularly difficult job once I've, got off my bum and got in the pond, really. So what I'm doing now is when I had got in the pond and moved the pump about a week ago, because maybe 2 weeks ago it got blocked, and I hadn't laid the pipework back along the very edge of the pond, so I am repositioning it here. And then I next do a little bit of cleaning where the pipework was that I couldn't get to, because obviously the pipe was in the way. I have noticed since I filmed this yesterday, I walked on the pond and there was some plant matter back in this one little spot where it tends to gather already. And I think that's because obviously when I'm cutting plants back and shifting things around, you don't really catch everything and then it finds its way. So I'll clear that out at some point. Right, this is my last job, and this is to replace a gate valve. Now the gate valve you can see there is the gate valve on where the water enters into the filter shed, basically. So it comes up from the pump and round that little bend, and that's the first gate valve, and it's the main gate valve of the whole system. And what's meant to happen when you close that, it stops water leaving the filtration and going back into the pond. The problem, as you all know, is that gate valves are fairly famous or infamous for not working over time and allowing water to run back, and that's what the current gate valve does. So what I'm doing is just replacing the whole gate valve and putting a new one in, because that gate valve is actually the first one I ever bought 8.5 years ago. So it's probably not been working properly for quite a few years, to be honest, but I finally got around to doing it. and I've and I got around to replacing it. Now, if you can see to the left of the gate valve, there's a splitter. So I've closed off both of those taps on the splitter to give me a little bit of a reduction in the flow out of the pond. But as you'll see, those those valves on the splitter don't really stop the water coming back out either. So I do have a little mini flood whilst I'm doing this, and the towels I've led down don't really help that well in preventing it, to be honest. But it took 5 minutes of clearing up after it. Now, I did watch Gaz's koi pond episode where he changes parts within a gate valve to stop it leaking, and I'm changing the whole gate valve, and that's not because I'm super rich. That's because I didn't trust myself to do that, to be honest. And also the connections either side of that gate valve aren't solvent welded, so it's much easier for me to replace it. I do replace a new one. It's on top of the pressure filter at the moment with a bend already in place, just because it was easier. You could also notice, if you look closely on the right, I'm wearing some fashionable knee pads because I have old man's knees, and anytime I'm kneeling down, and I'd advise this even if you're young. I'm waffling a lot here, but it just saves on knee pain just to have some nice knee pads. Anyway, so yeah, I just put a bit of towel under there and pad it out, and then I start taking the thing apart really. So what you also might notice is I've two different connectors. One connector is just a normal 1.5 inch rubber 90 degree boot that just goes onto a little reducer that fits into the gate valve and then into the boot. But on the other side, I've got a 2 inch to 1.5 inch reducer rubber boot, and that just goes on the main part of the gate valve, and actually does a really good job. I did it because I broke the previous insert, the tiny bit of pipe insert you have, and I didn't have anything else, and I put that on as a temporary measure thinking maybe it wouldn't work and it might leak a little bit over time, but it never has, so I've just kept it. I just put it back on. Now, I had some trouble separating some of these bits, which is I thought I would, which is why I put a spare 90 degree on the new valve, because I wasn't sure I'd get it all off easily. But yeah, it's just a question of getting to a point where I can have a bit of leverage, and then it comes off nicely, really. I'm sorry my head's in the way. There's just not room in my filter shed to do any decent amount of filming, really. I suppose I could have had it a little bit higher and over, but yeah. So yeah, now you can see the water's running out, and in a little bit I kind of prop it up just to see if that helps, but it doesn't really, and in the end I just accept I'm going to have a little bit of a flood that I'll need to clear up. So yeah, that's the old one, and it's just to, yeah, I try and get it to stop leaking, but it doesn't really work. Now, if that looks a bit of a strange setup there, you're probably right. And if you don't know my system, the water comes in round that bend into that gate valve you can see, and then is split. And the far pipe on that splitter goes off round the back of the shed, and then goes through a UV and then into my multi-bay and then into my moving bed and back to the pond. The near side piece of the splitter feeds into that pressure filter that then feeds into a Tempest. And again, because I have quite a lot of plant matter in my pond and a fair amount of algae over the course of the year, which kind of dies off by itself quite a lot of the time, it's useful having that pressure filter as a pre-filter to the skimmer, and it means it's much easier to clean the skimmer in the way it's meant to be cleaned, really. But anyway, that's why I've got a splitter, and that's why the water comes in that way. I tend to send about 40% of the water to the pressure filter and skimmer, and about 60% to the UV, the multi-bay, and then the moving bed. So yeah, that's the new one with a 90 degree already in place, and I just sit it over that pipe, and water's leaking out as we speak here, all over my hand. And I'm not blocking it, so you can't see what a bad job I'm doing it. I'm just doing it because there's so little room. So yeah, I just screw that back in place and tighten it up. And in a minute, I've realised I've got the 90 degree at the wrong angle, so I have to loosen it back a bit and twist it and then tighten it up again. Because, you know, I can never do any amount of work in the shed without bodging a little bit. So yeah, there's a little bit of water, not so much. I'm that worried. The floor of the shed is vinyl covering it, so as long as it doesn't seep too much around the edges, it doesn't really damage. I don't get any wood damage or anything from it. So it's just a question of clearing it up. So yeah, I haven't got the 90 degree at the right angle, so I just loosen it off a bit and then give it a bit of a twist. Now you may ask me why I've got lots of rubber boots rather than solvent welded pieces of solid pipe, and the reason for that is I'm a coward to solvent weld things and be sure I've got everything in the right place and I won't change my mind and then have to replace it. So I stick with rubber boots. I know lots of people have had issues with rubber boots. I've not really ever had an issue with rubber boots. I do routinely go round and tighten them up, all the ones I can get to. There's 2 rubber boots I can't get to, which I'm guessing will be my first leak. But yeah, I've not really had a problem. What I found though is the EA ones are much better than the other makes. And I don't really know who makes the other ones, but I say I've never had an issue. The ones I have had an issue with, this was back in the day when lots of my pipe work was outside, not in a shed. It was the non-EA branded ones that I had problems with. The EA ones. Some of these boots in this system are over 5 years old. They've been part of the setup almost as long as that gate valve has. So anyway, I've connected the 90 degree up. I'm just going back and just doing a final little tighten. Obviously you don't want to over tighten, but yeah, I'm just doing a little final tighten just to be sure. And I can say, no spoiler alerts, I didn't have a single drip out of them, and I shouldn't really. This is fairly simple task. I do something really clever here. I'm opening all the valves up and then I turn the pump on and I don't open the new gate valve, which is a silly thing to do, but equally also shows me that all the joints before that new gate valve and the joint on the right of the gate valve must be fairly sound and watertight, because all that water under pressure didn't leak at all. So what I did after doing this is obviously I dried up the floor and then I put some dry kitchen towel underneath all the new joints, or at least the replaced joints. And the reason I do that is it's just really easy to see if there's any drips later on. So I've put that, and at time of making this video, which is about, I would say, 7 hours after I did this, there's not a drip. So I've got away with another piece of filtration maintenance without any major problems. I shouldn't say that, should I? I'm going to go out to the shed in the morning. The pond's going to be half empty and there's going to be water all over the shop. But yeah, I'm going to be confident. I'm going to be confident and say I've done the simplest of tasks successfully, which is a good thing. And I'm glad I've done it. It's a job I've literally been putting off for years, and I'm glad I've done that. And water for at least a year or two won't flow back into the pond. Right, I thought I'd just end this video with a shot of the pond back in the summer when it was looking not its best, but it was looking better. It hasn't got all the lily pads, haven't grown back yet. And I just thought I'd talk about what I'm going to do this year in the pond. And the answer to that is not a lot. Partly because I don't have any money, and partly for fairly significant reasons, but also even if those reasons weren't around, I can't really afford to make any really significant changes to my filtration on my pond. And what changes I could make would just be tinkering, and I don't think to any real benefit. My filtration last year, I fed more than I'd ever fed before in my pond, and I fed earlier in the year, and I had zero water quality issues. I had a great year last year in my pond after the otters. And, you know, so I don't really feel I need to change anything other than to make it easier, to make work and cleaning filters and all of that, and getting, you know, I'd love an RDF, but I can't afford one. I am getting a new fish. I've got a new common carp on order, and that should be coming, and that will be the last of the fish that I add to the pond. If anything, any changes to stocking will be fish leaving, which is basically the rudd. If you know, I've got 40 odd rudd in the pond, and it's too many. I don't feed the rudd. They live on whatever larvae and insects and algae they can find in amongst the plants and on the walls of the pond. I don't feed them. And that worked really well the last batch I had, but that was about 14 or 15. And I'm wondering if there's too many for the amount of natural food in the pond that can sustain it. And also I can't keep the 40 forever. So I will be moving probably 2/3, if not slightly more, on at some point. And I will, as I've promised, talk more about that. Well, I'll say now, what I want to do is keep all the silver ones. They're a combination of golden rudd, these fry, and silver rudd. And I'm going to keep just the silver rudd. I'm not going to keep the golden because they're not natural, and my pond is meant to be natural after all. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this really waffly edition. It's my 100th episode, and I was going to do something special, but nothing special was happening. So I thought I ought to put something together, especially as, you know, people have carried on subscribing. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I would be really, really grateful. Please like if you've enjoyed it. Please ask me any questions you want. Make any comments you want within reason. I'll love it, and I will engage after a fashion. But having said all that, thanks very much for watching again, and I will see you next time.